her reputation precedes her. Known for her right-leaning views, Japan's presumptive Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is already making waves abroad. Will her foreign policy stir fresh tensions in a region already fraught with historical and territorial disputes? Stay tuned for Press Perspective today. Welcome to Press Perspective. It's Tuesday, October 14th here in Seoul. I'm Oh Soo-young filling in for Min Sunhee. Sanae Takaichi won Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party's leadership election earlier this month. She has yet to be confirmed by Parliament as Prime Minister, but the 64-year-old politician's controversial stance on Japan's wartime past and her nationalistic rhetoric are drawing scrutiny, particularly from Seoul and Beijing. For more on what her leadership could mean for regional diplomacy, I'm joined by Camille Ruiz with Radio France International. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm also joined by Fabian Kretschmer with Germany's news agency DPA. Thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here, yeah.
Well, my first question goes to you, Fabian. So, Takaichi is being described as an aspiring Margaret Thatcher. Some call her the Japanese Le Pen or a female Shinzo Abe for her nationalistic views. And well, what do we currently know about her political background and her foreign policy?
Yeah, in my opinion, all those comparisons, they are not so far-fetched, especially the Margaret Thatcher one, because she herself claimed that Margaret Thatcher was one of her political role models. So I want to give a small background about her biography, because I found her biography quite interesting. You know, she was a drum player, playing in a heavy metal band during university years. She was driving motorcycles. She worked as a newscaster before entering politics, and that was more than 30 years ago. I would say that Shinzo Abe, the deceased former prime minister, was one of her mentors, and she's kind of following in his footsteps when it comes to economic policy. Abenomics is one hashtag. I mean, that includes very loose monetary policy, fiscal stimulus. I mean, that is on her economic agenda, but otherwise, I mean, she's a woman, obviously, and but she will probably not do much in terms of gender equality. She's rather conservative on that front. I mean, also when it comes to sexual minorities, she's not advancing that, but rather regressing in that regard. In terms of her political stance, I mean, she's definitely very conservative, maybe even nationalist when it comes to foreigner policy, migrants, etc. She's quite a hardliner. And she has a rather revisionist view on history. Maybe we can talk about that later. But foreign policy, and I think that's really important for South Korea, she is quite a security hawk. Pro-US, I mean, she's looking forward to foster ties with the US. She is quite anti-China, or let's say critical towards China, and very interestingly, very supportive of Taiwan. Maybe one detail I should also add, she wants to expand Japanese military. I mean, we know from the history that, you know, the constitution in Japan was basically limited what the military can do and what Japan is allowed to do, and she wants to revise that and basically strengthen the defense capabilities of the Japanese military.
Right, so she's been described as something of a rock star, a metal lady in a way, and not afraid to ruffle some feathers, especially with some of her revisionist views. And she's been aligned with those who they tend to downplay Japan's imperial past and wartime atrocities. Camille, what kind of concerns is this raising in Seoul?
Yes, so as you said, in Korea, Takaichi is known for her past visits to the contentious Yasukuni Shrine Memorial, where Japan's war dead, including convicted war criminals, are commemorated. So every time a politician visits, it's bringing outrage to the public debate here in South Korea. But not only has she visited multiple times the memorial, but she also has repeatedly questioned mainstream accounts of comfort women, you know, and euphemism, for the thousands of women most of them Korean, who were forced into sexual slavery by Japan's military during World War II. In South Korea, it's a very sensitive historic issue. For years and years, there have been, and still going on, if I'm not wrong, protests in front of the Japanese embassy here in Seoul. So most of the protesters are women, different ages, old or young, and they are asking for a public and sincere apology from the Japanese government and demand compensation. They also want the companies which participate in those war crimes to be punished. So if Takaichi is elected, it would not only probably never happen under her term, but it also can damage the relation between the two countries if she takes a position on the matter as she already did in the past. But I mean, as a prime minister, it would be a prime minister who represents her people. So it would be. It can be even more concerning for Seoul. It would probably be very tricky for President Lee Jae-myung to handle. So one of the key questions is how the president of South Korea is would deal with it. But analysts believe the former security minister's stance may be tempered by the realities of fragile coalition in the region.
Sure, but of course, as you said, the uncertainty looms, and perhaps that extends to China as well, Fabian, where you've been for 5 years, partly why we couldn't have coffee since 2018. But what's the view from Beijing?
Yeah, actually, there are not much official reactions yet. I mean, the foreign ministry, and they have a daily press briefing in Beijing. They did not comment much because she's not confirmed yet as a prime minister. But it's no secret that Beijing is not happy about her election. And there are two main reasons. One is the historical view of Takaichi. I mean, the revisionist mindset, I would say. I mean, it's important to know that Japan did not only commit a lot of war crimes on the Korean peninsula, but of course also in China. If you want to see that, you can go to Nanjing. There's a memorial, like a big museum where, I mean, everything is captured and documented. A big massacre, war crimes like chemical experiments against the local population. I mean, really horrible things. And so if there's no official distancing and apology by a Japanese leader, then of course that angers the Chinese people. But the second thing, and that relates to the present, is her stance towards Taiwan. I mean, that she's basically saying Taiwan should decide, or the Taiwanese should decide about their future, and there should not be any change in the status quo that is done by force. Namely, China should not conquer Taiwan. I mean, she's very outspoken in that regard, and that also angers Beijing, because for Beijing that's an inner Chinese matter. They don't want anyone to comment on Taiwan. But I would say Beijing probably has a let's wait and see approach. Why? Because they give the benefit of the doubt to someone, and we know that from leaders not only in Asia but also in Europe, they're much more hawkish when it comes to China before they're in office, and when they're in office they have to deal with quote-unquote realpolitik. They also have to combine economic interests, and of course China is a big trading partner also for Japan, and that usually leads to the fact that politicians, once they're in power, they tone down their rhetoric quite a bit.
Right, and of course, Fabian mentioned the constitution, which it looks like the presumptive prime minister for now. She's been strongly in favor of revising it, the pacifist parts of the Japanese constitution. So Takaichi is in favor of revising it so that Japan militarizes beyond its self-defense forces. What do you think, Camille, would be the regional reaction to that if it happens?
Yeah, so as Fabian said, there is some historical issues between South Korea and China on one side and Japan on the other. Tokyo still depends on the United States for defense, and there are still military bases on the Japanese territory. But observers says that it's much more for U.S. national interests, particularly towards China, than effective protection for Japanese people. Takaishi even said, I quote, "Unless Japan can defend itself, its fate will always be at the mercy of shallow U.S. opinion." So what Takaishi plans to do if she gets the prime minister position is revise the Article 9 of the Constitution. What is the Article 9? It renounces the right to wage war and stipulates that it will not maintain an army, navy, air force, or any other military force. So Sanae Takaichi suggested Japan procure advanced defense equipment, promote research and development, and increase defense spending. Why? To cope with China military buildup. She also would like to assertive territorial claims and be able, if necessary, to face North Korea nuclear and missile programs. And as for missile programs, missile defense, she called for new legislation that will enable Japan to attack enemy bases to temporarily nullify their functions. But still, we have to wait to see if she's elected and if she will actually revise the constitution or and all. Yeah.
Right. Both of you have actually mentioned, Takaichi having to face up to the geopolitical reality. She may actually harbour these nationalistic beliefs and views, but when she actually becomes prime minister, then she will have to play to realpolitik. And Fabian, well, maybe we saw this with the Lee Jae-myung government. So before he came to power, there were many concerns about how this whole Tokyo relationship, where that would be headed. But once he came into power, he committed to continuing the reciprocal visits of leaders between Seoul and Tokyo, and also committed to respecting past historical agreements despite having been forged by previous conservative administrations. So what most experts, although some experts worry that all of this might fall through under Takaichi, most diplomats that I've spoken to, they say that she's likely to show a policy of continuity. But I would like to hear what you think of this. Do you think she might surprise us in that respect?
Well, it's a tough question because I'm not really so much of an expert on Japanese politicians, but I would assume so that actually there will be a continuation. Why? I mean, you already mentioned that the geopolitical reality has changed. I give you several examples. I mean, North Korea is basically a rising threat. I mean, they are really emboldened now with their military cooperation with Russia. They expanded military technology, their nuclear program, etc. So this is a threat for both Japan and South Korea. We have China, which is a rising economic competitor and also a systemic challenge, I would say. I mean, I think China is disrupting the international order to some degree. Then you have Trump in the White House. I mean, Trump has not proven to be a particularly reliable security partner. I mean, there are so many changes and disruptions that basically the countries here in the region who are both liberal democracies, who share actually several values, they should maybe unite to a certain degree. I'm talking about South Korea and Japan. And, when this revival of friendship was started by former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, there was somewhat controversial here among South Koreans because, of course, we know that, there are historical wounds which have not healed. But there's also a certain pragmatism that is needed. And when Lee Jae-myung is expanding this friendship or this revival of bilateral relations, then, it's also a recognition of those realities. I would say that the upcoming Japanese prime minister would be smart to keep good relationships with South Korea. Otherwise, Japan would be quite isolated here in the region. And I think she would also be very smart to tone down her rhetoric when it comes to previous war crimes of Japan. I think she should rather apologize and distance herself from the dark side of the Japanese history, or at least try to avoid that topic.
Right, so as you mentioned, I mean, there's a whole list of reasons why Seoul and Tokyo should cooperate. So I suppose there's no real reason to trigger any disputes. And well, especially with public sentiment, Fabian, having changed quite noticeably in recent years among the South Korean public, they tend to view Japanese much more favorably than they have, let's say, even 3-4 years ago. I mean, have you noticed that in everyday life here as a correspondent?
There's also a tough question. I would say there are some signs that I've noticed, but overall, I mean, Koreans, in my opinion, always had a very ambivalent view on Japan. There was, of course, some sentiments against Japan based on historical wounds, but at the same time, there was also an admiration. For example, Japan has always been a very, one of the most popular, if not the most popular from time to time, travel destination. And Koreans who traveled to Tokyo, they also spoke of, I mean, high tones saying that, you know, things work fine there. And actually, the Japanese people that I met, they are polite. And so actually, the view was also quite positive in some way. Politically, that's another story, especially among the left. You had a lot of resentments against Japan. Now, what happened is first, time has passed, so the historical wounds might maybe not, I mean, they still play a huge role. We should not underestimate that, but maybe not as much as, let's say, 20, 30 years ago. And what has also changed is the geopolitical reality, and I think also people notice that. I mean, what has actually become much more of a threat in terms of perception is China. I mean, you go to political rallies, you look at the political banners, like the posters that you can see in Seoul, for example. They are quite critical towards China, and you can say that maybe Japan is not so much the scapegoat anymore, but I think China much more. And of course, I mean, scapegoat is maybe the wrong term, but you can just say that the negative views are more directed towards Beijing now, not so much against Tokyo.
Right, so perhaps in recognition of that, the current government has really made an effort to compartmentalize these things, so working on the future relationship while working separately on historical issues. And Camille, I have the same question to you. As a correspondent here, have you noticed this change that we've seen in the polls about Korean public sentiment towards Japan?
Well, to be honest, I'm here now for about 1 year, so I cannot tell how it was in the past, but only what I can feel now. So first of all, I want to emphasize that the fact that 12 million people traveled between the two countries last year. A lot of young people, a lot of Korean I know, traveled to Japan. So I think it helps a lot, you know, to actually go and see the country, eat the food, admire landscapes, talk to Japanese people. Obviously, there is a lot of exchanges, Korean students in Japan, Japanese students in Korea. They are consuming each other cultural products. Like I have many friends who are watching anime, who are reading manga. I think that understanding each other is a very important move towards peaceful relationship. And time is probably helping too, as Fabian said. But still I have friends very interested in politics, in democracy, who are trying to boycott Japanese products. Who are very sensitive to words like sushi, for example, insisting on using the Korean word tolbap. But it's still is not representative of the majority of the youth in Korea. Of course, they acknowledge the difference between Japanese people and Japanese government, and that they are more angry, disappointed against officials who are like considering that they never apologize for their war crimes, and that they should not only do it, but publicly doing apologizes and with sincerity. And there are some factors like age or gender which can influence political opinion. So, of course, public sentiment towards Japanese people depends on every individual, but it seems, at least, as Fabian said again, that at least politicians stop using it to manipulate opinion. As it is currently the case with anti-Chinese hateful comments from a lot of observers' point of view.
Right, and perhaps that's a testament to the kind of democracy the country might be. You know, the public sentiment is clearly, you know, warming to the Japanese. In fact, more than warming. 12 million, that's a sizable fraction of the Korean population, you know, traveling to Japan. And really, as you said, separating political issues, historical issues, and building friendships. So this being the 60th year of the Korea-Japan relationship of normalizing ties, yes, we're seeing progress there. And Fabian, well, there are, of course, some historical triggers that, you know, pull at the heartstrings of Koreans, and that's Japanese politicians' trip to the very controversial shrine for World War II Class A criminals in Japan. And apparently Takaishi is reportedly considering skipping a visit this autumn. So do you think that is a good start to her regional diplomacy?
I would say that it would be a good start because it's not confirmed yet. I think she is still making up her mind. But yeah, it would be smart for her not to do so, not visit that shrine. I give you an analogy. Imagine a German leader, like political leader, would visit like a graveyard where like convicted war criminals from the Second World War from Nazi Germany are honored. I mean, that's unimaginable and not acceptable. I mean, I'm sure that people in France would be outraged by that. And so I think, I hope she doesn't visit that shrine. And so far, I think I would be happy if Japan and South Korea would get along better. Both societies could learn a lot from each other. There's also much more win-win potential economically and politically. I think they also share a lot in common. And those historical triggers, they always stand in the way. And I see, I must say clearly, the Japanese politicians in responsibility. They should not visit that shrine. I mean, I think that is not too much to ask for. Also, as a South Korean, I mean, sorry, I'm not South Korean, but for South Korean public, I think it would be not too much to ask for Japanese politicians not to visit that shrine. And I think that is a minimum that you should expect, and I hope she will not do so.
Right, of course, World War II, it hasn't even been a century yet since it occurred, right? So the scars are still there, quite visible. And, well, Camille, well, lastly, how are European nations looking at Takaichi's impending premiership, if it happens, of course?
Yeah. First of all, several British and French media outlets portrayed her and her political views about conservatism, about being the protégé of Shinzo Abe, about economy, and a lot of them saw her victory as certain. But as she was elected new leader of the LDP, but as you know, the Komeï party ended its cooperation with the LDP 4 days ago. Because the LDP didn't fully accept better management of political finances according to the Komeï party. So it threatens her appointment as prime minister and also paved the way for the opposition. Now, European media outlets don't hesitate to use strong headlines, displaying it as a political crisis. Other candidates seem not really popular enough to be featured in most newspapers. But so, as I said earlier, they are focusing on her public statements about immigration, for instance. We know that Japan, like South Korea, has a very low birth rate compared to other nations, and they are struggling to hire young workers for shops, construction sites, or factories. That's why some French media and some experts assert that despite her words about immigrants being rude, she probably couldn't do anything about it. And on feminism, she doesn't want women to choose between their surname or their husband's surnames. It would be against Japanese traditions, she said, but it's very interesting from an European point of view because in Spain, France, Germany also, I think it's legal and it's a fundamental right, a political victory for feminists. It's seen as a step forward for gender equality, and even if it may be seen as just an administrative detail, it's part of women's identity and background. So, yes, just to say that European media have been very interested in this topic, but not really in a positive way, I would say.
Well, as ever in this industry, we'll have to wait and see, because before anything else, she needs to take office, which of course requires parliamentary approval, and because the junior partner of her ruling Liberal Democratic Party has decided to leave the coalition. We don't know how that's going to affect her potential premiership yet. Well, thank you very much, Camille Ruiz from Radio France International and Fabian Kretschmer from DPA. Thank you very much. That's where we'll wrap up this edition of Press Perspective. Do join us at the same time tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.